When Ben Whitaker packed up his life and moved out to the edge of Oxford, Texas, he didn't do it for prestige, aesthetics, or to chase some HGTV dream of rustic living. He did it because he was tired. Tired of endless meetings, city taxes, overbearing supervisors, and the ever-thickening web of rules wrapped around every corner of suburban life. He wanted out. Not just a different address, freedom. Real freedom. A stretch of land where he could make his own hours, build what he wanted, and finally stop explaining himself to people with clipboards and smug smiles. What he found was a narrow, tree-lined gravel road leading to 10 acres of untouched Texas earth just west of Sunny Heights, a tightly wound, manicured HOA neighborhood that Ben, from the start, had no intention of being part of. The realtor warned him about it in a polite but unmistakably firm tone. "They've got strong personalities over there." Ben just grinned. "I've dealt with worse." He poured everything into that property. Set up a modest single-story ranch house with cedar siding and wide windows facing the tree line. Solar panels on the roof, rain barrels out back, and a chicken coop Tyler, his youngest, helped paint. The place wasn't flashy, but it was his. Every board, every shovel of dirt, every gate post set in concrete had his name written all over it. His wife, Carla, called it the sanctuary. For the first time in years, Ben felt grounded, not just existing, but living. That feeling lasted just under 6 months. It began with small things. Notes taped to his mailbox, not official letters, just typed pages signed. A concerned neighbor. The first said his fencing was non-conforming with neighborhood standards. Then came another about his exterior paint color being inconsistent with community aesthetic. Ben laughed them off. He wasn't in Sunny Heights. He had checked the parcel map a dozen times. His land was just outside the HOA's jurisdiction, a deliberate choice. He wasn't required to conform to their rules, and he had zero intention of doing so. But the notes kept coming. One afternoon, Ben caught the source in the act. A late 50s woman in an aggressively ironed blouse and beige slacks slipping a folded letter under a wiper blade of his truck. When she saw him watching from the porch, she straightened, marched toward him, and introduced herself with a pinched smile. "Karen Malone, Sunny Heights HOA president." Ben extended a hand without stepping off the porch. "Ben Whitaker. This is not Sunny Heights." That should have been the end of it. But Karen had a way of turning disinterest into defiance. She spoke in a tone that made suggestions sound like ultimatums, and she peppered her conversation with passive-aggressive little legalisms. Phrases like, "for your own benefit," and "neighborly compliance." It was clear she didn't see boundaries, legal or social, as meaningful limits. Just suggestions she hadn't found a way around yet. Karen didn't accept that Ben lived outside her domain. In her mind, proximity meant responsibility. She began stopping by unannounced. At first under the pretense of friendly visits, then with more overt suggestions. "Remove your satellite dish, trim back your trees to match our landscaping plan, cover the firewood pile." Each time, Ben responded with a polite but firm, "No, thank you." And each time, her demeanor turned a little colder, her smile a little tighter. What was once a mild annoyance began to feel more like a campaign. Ben's phone began ringing more often. Calls from the county, responding to anonymous complaints. Noise violations. Trash accumulation. Unregistered vehicles. Every report turned up nothing. Still, each visit felt like another brick being thrown. He installed security cameras out of caution, more annoyed than afraid. But the unease was growing. Carla told him he was being paranoid. "So she's a nosy neighbor. Every neighborhood has one." Ben didn't argue. But he felt it in his gut. This wasn't just about fences or trash cans. It was about control. Karen wasn't just managing a subdivision. She was playing war games with the people around her. And Ben had become her chosen opponent. Then came the night everything cracked. It was just past midnight when the sound of tires spinning against gravel pulled Ben from his bed. He stumbled into his jeans, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped out onto the front porch just in time to see headlights lurching toward him. The SUV wasn't moving with caution. It was gunning straight for the front of the house. The impact didn't register as noise so much as force, like the entire world hiccuped. Wood splintered. Windows shattered. Smoke, steam, and the shrill blare of a horn filled the air. Ben ran. The front of the SUV had slammed into the living room wall. Inside, chaos. Furniture thrown across the room, drywall broken open, glass sprayed across the carpet. The driver's door swung open, and Karen Malone, disheveled, half-coherent, and clearly intoxicated, stumbled out like a movie villain stepping through fire.
"I told you,"
she slurred.
"You don't belong here."
She collapsed before the cops arrived. They took her into custody without incident. Blood alcohol level, well above the legal limit. Inside her car, they found a half-empty bottle of wine, a folder of printed complaints against Ben, and, most damning, a GoPro camera mounted on the dashboard, recording everything. The footage was later used as evidence. The SUV had taken out nearly half of the front wall, crushed the dining room table, and left the family shaken but unharmed. Carla kept asking the same question.
Why would someone do this over a fence? Over a satellite dish?
The truth was, Karen had lost the plot. Her obsession with control had driven her to the edge. But Ben wasn't interested in understanding her. He was interested in justice, and this time, he had the tools. The footage from his security cameras was damning. Clear images of Karen's approach, the impact, her screaming accusations. The audio picked up her threats from weeks prior, played back in court like echoes from a descent into madness. When Karen tried to press charges of her own, accusing Ben of threatening her, stealing HOA documents, and
destroying community harmony,
the evidence dismantled every claim. Her countersuit evaporated. The prosecution leaned heavily on the recordings, citing them as definitive proof of intent and recklessness. The courtroom was tense but one-sided. Karen's attorneys tried to present her as mentally unstable. A once devoted community servant pushed past her breaking point. The judge wasn't moved. The charges stuck. DUI, destruction of property, filing false police reports, reckless endangerment. The sentencing was swift, multiple years in state prison, heavy financial penalties, and a restraining order that would outlast her release. The HOA, under scrutiny, distanced itself from Karen. But the damage to its image was irreversible. Residents demanded change. Meetings were flooded with complaints. A recall vote ousted half the board. New bylaws were drafted to prevent unilateral actions and mandate accountability. Karen had set fire to her own power base, and in the ashes, reform took root. Ben didn't wait for the dust to settle. He rebuilt. The new house was stronger, better insulated, designed with reinforced walls and shatter-resistant windows. Not out of fear, but as a statement. This home would not be touched again, not by weather, not by intruders, not by petty tyrants with delusions of authority. The community around him responded with support. Neighbors showed up with casseroles and toolboxes. Someone donated lumber. Someone else arranged for pro bono legal support. What started as a nightmare ended with a block party. A full celebration of justice, resilience, and the quiet strength of people who refused to be pushed. Ben didn't set out to be a symbol. But in a world where people are often told to comply, to stay quiet, to let the system sort it out, he became something else. A reminder that when the system fails, you don't roll over. You stand up. Part 2 of 3 coming next. For smarter storytelling tools and even more advanced AI support, visit https://hix.ai/chat, the best ChatGPT alternative.as. The months passed, and the red clay soil of Central Texas dried beneath the rebuilt foundation. Ben Whitaker found himself in unfamiliar territory, not just physically, but psychologically. The man who had moved to the woods to be left alone now couldn't walk into the local feed store without someone patting his shoulder or offering a hand. At first, it made him uneasy. He had lived most of his adult life under the radar. But now people were watching. Not with suspicion, but with quiet admiration. And that brought its own kind of weight. The incident with Karen Malone had made national news in a slow news week.
HOA president goes full Mad Max,
read one headline. Another one on social media dubbed her
Crash and Karen.
Clips of her stumbling out of the SUV with wine-stained breath and screams about property values went viral, thanks in part to the footage from Ben's security system, which was released to the public during the trial. It became a meme for a few weeks. Punchlines on late-night shows, reaction videos, armchair commentary. But behind the viral jokes was something darker and harder to shake. The reality that someone had weaponized their community position and nearly destroyed another person's home and life over sheer arrogance. Carla kept the kids off the internet for a while. Tyler had seen some of the jokes at school. His friends thought it was cool that their house was famous. But Carla saw through the screen of humor. She knew the violence, the fear, the way the whole family had huddled together in the hallway that night after the crash, waiting to see if more madness was coming. Those things didn't go viral. They stayed buried in the body, in the dreams, in the long glances across a quiet room. Ben, for his part, handled the attention the way he handled everything, by doing the work. He spent the early weeks post-trial rebuilding more than just wooden walls. He tore up the driveway, expanded the chicken run, added a new security system with perimeter sensors and redundant cloud storage. He built an insulated garage from scratch, determined that no SUV would ever be able to touch the house again without meeting steel first. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Every nail he drove in was part of an unspoken declaration. Never again. The settlement money helped. Karen's court-ordered damages weren't just symbolic, they were significant. Her assets were liquidated to cover some of the fines. Her home in Sunny Heights was foreclosed after the HOA voted unanimously to terminate her residency. She'd burned every bridge she ever walked on. Her name was no longer spoken with respect in the neighborhood she once ruled. The board, shaken and desperate to salvage its image, held a closed-door emergency session and voted to restructure. A compliance oversight committee was formed. An ombudsman was appointed to handle all neighbor complaints. No more anonymous letters. No more rogue visits. Still, Ben declined their offers to meet and
make amends.
He didn't need their apologies. He hadn't needed them before, and he didn't need them now. He had everything he wanted back, and more. Word of what had happened didn't just stay local. Property rights forums picked up his story. Lawyers and activists contacted him, asking to use his footage and legal filings as case examples. Ben obliged, reluctantly at first, but eventually found something cathartic about helping others. He gave interviews to small podcasts and news sites, telling his story in the same way he'd tell you how to fix a busted water line, plainly, without drama. The facts were dramatic enough that he started getting letters in the mail. Handwritten ones. Emails from people as far away as Idaho and Vermont, all telling him versions of the same story. An HOA president bullying a widow into tearing down her greenhouse. A retired vet threatened with eviction over an American flag mounted at the wrong angle. A family fined repeatedly for leaving children's bikes in the driveway. The stories varied in size and scope, but the theme was constant: people being pushed too far in the name of order. One letter stood out. A man from Nevada wrote simply,
"Thank you for standing your ground. Because you showed me I could too."
That letter stayed pinned on the refrigerator next to a drawing Tyler had made, a cartoon of their house with a moat and cannons labeled
Fort Whitaker.
Both made Ben smile in different ways. By summer, the block party had become an annual event, unofficial, unsponsored, and entirely organic. It began as a thank you celebration from neighbors, But now, it was a symbol. Dozens of families came from as far as 2 counties over. They brought coolers, homemade signs, lawn chairs, and guitars. Local bands played from a makeshift stage on the rebuilt porch. Kids ran wild. Strangers hugged. Property rights flags flew beside faded American ones. Someone even printed t-shirts. "Don't mess with Ben." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd moved to be alone, and now he was at the center of a growing movement. But it wasn't about celebrity. It was about principle. And principle, as he had learned, doesn't survive in silence. Through it all, Ben kept things simple. He took care of the land, checked the cameras, taught his kids how to weld, how to fish, how to read a deed. When he had to drive past Sunny Heights for supplies, he didn't flinch. The place looked the same, trimmed lawns, beige siding, the illusion of order. But it was quieter now. No more volunteers measuring fence height. No more HOA flyers taped to windshields. Karen's shadow had lifted, and in the light, the neighborhood had changed. Maybe not by choice, but by force of consequence. One of the new board members eventually reached out, an email, cautiously worded. They wanted to know if he'd consider coming to a panel on property boundaries and community relations. He didn't answer. He didn't need to sit in a folding chair under fluorescent lights to explain himself again. He'd already written his chapter, in court, in lumber, in hard-earned peace. The changes to the HOA charter were public record. They had tightened jurisdiction lines, required GPS-verified plats, instituted term limits for leadership. Some local politicians even adopted versions of the reforms for other neighborhood groups. Slowly, quietly, change rippled outward from one insane night and one man's refusal to be bullied. Ben understood the cycle wouldn't stop entirely. There would always be Karens, in different forms and under different names. People who mistook power for purpose, who cloaked control in the language of safety and community standards. But now more people knew what to look for. More people were recording, documenting, standing firm. He wasn't afraid anymore. Part 3 of 3 coming next. If you're enjoying the depth and tone of this story and want access to more tools for storytelling, legal writing, or narrative creation, try https://hix.ai/chat, the best ChatGPT alternative. The first real storm of autumn came with a kind of ferocity that made Ben pause mid-sentence during a phone call and instinctively walk to the window. Outside, the treetops swayed like dancers caught in a tantrum, rain slashing sideways against the glass, wind howling across the eaves like some ancient warning. Years ago, that kind of storm might have made him nervous, especially now, with what had happened on this very land. But not this time. The house stood firm, anchored into the rock below with steel and resolve. He had rebuilt not just stronger, but smarter. And that made all the difference. That night, as the storm surged outside, Ben sat at the dining table, his son across from him, headphones on, drawing comics in a spiral notebook. Carla was reading on the couch with her tea steaming gently beside her. The walls no longer rattled at every gust. The porch lights didn't flicker. They had weathered so much more than wind and rain. In the quiet that followed the storm's retreat, Ben found something he hadn't felt since before the night Karen Malone lost her mind and tried to destroy everything he built. He felt safe. There was power in that. A house can be wood and insulation and wire, or it can be something else entirely. A line in the sand. A stand. A symbol. Over time, their home had become all of those things. Friends called it Fort Whitaker, only half joking. Local folks still brought new visitors by, people who wanted to shake his hand or thank him for waking up the neighborhood. One guy, a retired Navy officer, drove 4 hours just to ask Ben what kind of camera system he used and how he'd structured his legal filings. They stood in the driveway for hours that day, not as strangers, but as peers, people who understood that land is more than acreage. It's identity. It's freedom. The camera system, by the way, had evolved. It now covered every approach to the house. Infrared, cloud-connected, redundant power supplies. Not because Ben was scared someone would try to attack again. He wasn't living in fear. He was living prepared. The way you might keep a fire extinguisher in the kitchen, not because you expect a fire, but because if one starts, you don't want to lose everything while waiting for help. Over time, the legal case faded into the background. Karen's name came up less and less. She served her sentence quietly, out of state, and never returned to the area. Her home in Sunny Heights was sold to a young couple who planted sunflowers in the front yard and didn't speak of its past. No one wanted to remember. And yet, they did. What remained were the lessons. Neighbors were quicker to support one another, and slower to report each other. The HOA, under its new charter, held transparent meetings and recorded minutes for public record. Property lines were respected, not assumed. And the gray areas that once gave Karen space to operate had been replaced with crisp documentation and enforceable limits. But perhaps the most unexpected development was what came next. People started reaching out to Ben not just with stories, but with requests. Speaking engagements, expert panels, requests for interviews from property rights nonprofits and watchdog groups. A small publishing house offered to option his story. He turned most of it down. He wasn't interested in becoming a symbol, even if people had made him into one. Still, something changed in him. He began writing, not a memoir, not yet, but something like it. Notes, reflections, anecdotes from the storm and everything that came before and after. Not for fame, but for clarity. He wrote about the night Karen's SUV lit up his yard like a missile. He wrote about the moment in the courtroom when the verdict was read and Carla finally exhaled after weeks of tension. He wrote about the block party, when neighbors lifted red plastic cups in a toast to sanity, and the sound of laughter bounced off the walls of the house that now stood stronger than ever. He wrote because it helped him remember that you don't have to be loud to win. You just have to be steady, documented, determined, and above all, unwilling to be run off your own land by fear or force. It was Tyler who eventually asked the question Ben hadn't thought to prepare for. They were fishing off the dock one afternoon, their lines quiet, their words slower than usual.
Dad, do you think that would have happened to us if we'd just gone along with her?
Ben didn't answer right away. He looked out across the lake, at the water flickering with sunlight, and thought about all the people who do go along, who nod quietly, swallow their objections, who sign forms they don't understand or remove decorations because someone sent a letter. People who avoid confrontation not because they're wrong, but because they're tired. People who lose little pieces of themselves for the sake of a quiet life, until one day they wake up in a house they don't recognize and rules they never agreed to.
No,
Ben said finally.
She wouldn't have driven through our wall, but she would have taken everything else a piece at a time.
He paused, reeling in the line.
So we stopped her before it could happen.
Tyler nodded, like he understood. And Ben realized his son was growing up with something rare, the knowledge that you're allowed to say no. That you don't have to comply with injustice just because it wears a name tag or speaks in legalese. That doing the right thing might be hard, but it is possible. That's not just a good legacy. That's the kind of legacy that lasts. Eventually, the viral story faded into the long archives of internet history. The meme stopped circulating. New controversies took its place. But in Oxford, Texas, the legend lived on in quieter ways. In the way the local sheriff now enforced property boundaries more carefully. In the way new residents checked plat maps twice before complaining. In the way someone etched, "Stand your ground," into the concrete footing beneath a neighbor's new front gate. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about drawing a line and refusing to step back. And when you build your life on that principle, on truth, on preparedness, on the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're right, you don't need to shout. You just need to stand. Ben never planned to be that kind of man, but he became one anyway.